The Galactic Concord had ruled the Orion Arm for 40,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once failed to conquer a primitive world. 12 elder species sat at the top of the galactic food chain, and they had built their empires on the backs of lesser creatures who could not fight back. When their survey drones discovered a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, the Concord saw nothing special. They saw factories waiting to be staffed. They saw mines waiting to be dug. They saw billions of warm bodies that could serve their purpose until they broke down and died. The classification came back within hours. Category 7, pre-spaceflight livestock. Earth was marked for harvest, and the Velkari Dominion won the bidding rights. The Velkari were a reptilian species with scales like black armor and eyes that held no warmth or mercy. They had enslaved over 200 worlds in their long history, considered themselves experts at breaking the will of primitive creatures. High Commander Scythax reviewed the data on humanity and felt nothing but boredom. These humans had nuclear weapons, yes, but they were still fighting among themselves. They had no unified government, no space fleet, no understanding of what waited for them in the stars above. Scythax ordered his subjugation fleet to begin the harvest operation. 3,000 warships dropped out of hyperspace above Earth on what the humans called a Tuesday morning. The sky turned dark with alien vessels, and every broadcast signal on the planet was overridden with a single message. "You belong to the Velkari Dominion now," the message declared. "Resistance will result in the death of your young." The humans did not surrender. Scythax was not surprised by this, because primitive species always resisted at first. That was why the Velkari had perfected the neural compliance. Collar, over thousands of years of conquest. The collar was a simple device that attached to the base of the skull and released chemicals directly into the brain. Every known species in the galaxy became docile and obedient within seconds of activation. The collars worked on the Nalthrix Hivemind warriors. They worked on the massive Gorath beasts of the Outer Rim. They worked on every single creature the Velkari had ever encountered. They did not work on humans. The first ground troops landed in what the humans called New York City, and they began attaching collars to captured civilians. The Velkari soldiers waited for the humans to go still and quiet, like every other species before them. Instead, the humans began to scream. But it was not a scream of pain or fear. It was a scream of rage. The neural compliance chemicals were supposed to suppress the stress response and create a feeling of peaceful acceptance. Neurochemistry had been forged through millions of years of evolution, through ice ages and plagues and endless tribal warfare. When the chemicals hit human brains, they triggered something the Velkari had never seen before. The collars did not create peace. They created monsters. Collared humans attacked with their bare hands, tearing at Velkari scales with fingers and teeth. One human soldier bit through his own arm to free himself from restraints so he could strangle a Velkari officer. Another human woman, barely 5 feet tall, killed 3 armed soldiers with a broken piece of glass before they could stop her. High Commander Scythax received the reports and felt something he had not experienced in 200 years of conquest. He felt the cold touch of doubt. "Remove the collars," he ordered. "We will break them the traditional way." But the traditional way did not work either. The Velkari burned cities, and humans rebuilt them underground. They killed leaders, and new leaders rose within hours. They separated families, and those families found each other across continents. Every tactic that had worked on 200 other worlds failed completely on Earth. The humans did not behave like livestock. They behaved like something far more dangerous. Within 3 months of the invasion, human scientists had captured enough Velkari weapons to begin reverse engineering them. A physicist in what remained of Japan figured out how plasma containment fields worked. An engineer in the ruins of Germany built the first human-made energy weapon. A teenager in Brazil hacked into a Velkari communications network and broadcast the technical specifications to every surviving research team on the planet. The humans were not just fighting back. They were learning. They were adapting. They were evolving faster than any species the Concord had ever encountered. Documented. High Commander Sidax sent a request for reinforcements, and the Concord denied it. "Pi, you have 3,000 ships," the Council replied. "The humans have none. Finish the harvest." Sithax wanted to tell them that they did not understand. He wanted to explain that these creatures were different, that something was wrong, that the harvest had become something else entirely. But he was Valkyrie, and the Valkyrie did not admit weakness. So he continued the campaign, and he watched his forces die. 1 year after the invasion began, a human resistance cell in the mountains of what was once called Switzerland captured a Valkyrie transport ship. The crew was killed, the ship was studied, and within 6 months, humans understood how to fly it. The second captured ship came faster, then the third, then the 10th. By the end of the second year, humans had a small fleet of stolen vessels, crewed by pilots who had taught themselves to fly through trial and error and sheer stubborn refusal to fail. The Galactic Concord began to pay attention. Ambassador Thalnix of the Crystalline Hegemony reviewed the reports from Earth and felt ice form in his silicon veins. "They should have broken by now," he said to the Council. "Every projection said they would break." "They are animals," High Sovereign Veltrix of the Valkyrie replied. "Animals always break eventually." But privately, Veltrix was no longer certain. The reports from Earth grew stranger with each passing month. Humans were not just surviving anymore. They were organizing, they were building, they were planning. And in the eyes of every human prisoner the Valkyrie captured, there was no fear and no despair. There was only a cold and patient hatred that promised one thing: revenge. 6 years after the invasion began, humanity launched its first counterattack. A fleet of 47 ships, most of them held together with welded scrap metal and desperate hope, jumped to a Valkyrie supply station at the edge of the solar system. Commander laughed when he saw the ragged human vessels approaching. He stopped laughing when they opened fire. The battle lasted 4 hours, and when it was over, the supply station was debris, and 39 human ships were jumping back to Earth. They had lost 8 vessels. They had killed 3,000 Valkyrie. And they had sent a message to the entire galaxy. Earth was no longer prey. Earth was hunting now, and the galaxy was not ready for what was coming. Commander Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and stared at the stars that had once seemed so distant and beautiful. Now she knew what lived among those stars, and beauty was the last word she would use. The Defiance was humanity's first true warship, built not from stolen scraps, but from human factories that had been constructed deep beneath the Earth's surface. It had taken 4 years to build, 4 years of blood and sacrifice, and countless lives lost to keep the project secret from Valkyrie orbital surveillance. But now it was complete, and Yuki felt its power humming beneath her feet. The old governments of Earth were gone, shattered by the invasion, and rebuilt into something harder and colder. The Terran Compact had risen from the ashes of 100 nations, unified by a simple truth that every human now understood. They were not alone in the universe. And the universe wanted them dead. General Marcus Cole appeared on the main view screen, his face scarred from a Valkyrie plasma burn that had nearly killed him 3 years ago. "Commander Tanaka," he said, "the Council has approved Operation Broken Chains. You have your orders." Yuki nodded, because she had been waiting for this moment since the day her daughter was taken by Valkyrie slavers. She had been waiting to make them pay. "Understood, General," she replied. "The Defiance is ready." "Then show them what humans can do." The view screen went dark, and Yuki turned to her crew. They were young, most of them born during the occupation and raised in underground bunkers where they learned to hate before they learned to read. They had never known a world without war, They had never known safety, or peace, or the simple joy of looking at the sky without fear. And they were ready to burn the galaxy down to make sure no human child ever felt that fear again. "All hands," Yuki announced. "Prepare for slip space jump. We are going hunting." The Defiance vanished from Earth orbit in a flash of light, and the Valkyrie patrol ships that had been watching did not even see it go. Because humanity had discovered something that changed everything. The elder races of the Concord had been lying about faster-than-light travel for 40,000 years. They claimed that slip space drives had natural limits, that ships could only travel so fast, that the laws of physics prevented anything faster. It was all a lie. Human scientists had torn apart captured Valkyrie drives and found the limiters hidden inside. The elder races had deliberately restricted FTL technology to control expansion and maintain their power. They had created artificial barriers to keep younger species trapped and dependent. Humanity removed those barriers. The Defiance did not travel at the speeds the Concorde considered possible. It traveled at speeds the Concorde considered impossible. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, the Galactic Concorde had grown desperate. The Valkyrie were failing, and failure was not acceptable when dealing with livestock. The Council turned to the Nauthrix Collective for help. The Nauthrix were a hive-mind species that shared thoughts across millions of bodies, and they were the galaxy's greatest experts in psychological warfare. They had broken entire civilizations without firing a single shot. They would break humanity the same way. The Nauthrix began broadcasting on every human frequency, filling the airwaves with carefully crafted messages designed to crush hope and inspire despair. They showed images of human slaves working in Valkyrie mines, their bodies broken and their eyes empty. They broadcast the screams of prisoners being tortured, letting every human on Earth hear the suffering of their own people. They promised that resistance was useless, that humanity would be ground down eventually, that the smart thing to do was surrender and accept their place as servants. The Nauthrix had used these tactics on 30 different species, and every single one had eventually given up. Humanity did not give up. Every broadcast of suffering became a recruitment video for the resistance. Every threat of extinction united humans who had been fighting each other for centuries. Every tortured scream did not break human will. It hardened it into something unbreakable. The Nauthrix Queen Mind analyzed the data and could not understand what she was seeing. "They should be breaking," she said to the Council. "The psychological models are clear. No species can endure this level of sustained trauma without collapse." "Then your models are wrong," Ambassador Thalmix replied. "These humans are not like other species. All species are fundamentally the same," the Queen Mind insisted. "They all have breaking points." "Perhaps," Thalmix said quietly, "or perhaps we have finally found a species that breaks differently." General Marcus Coles stood before the Terran Council and presented the document that would define humanity's future. He called it the Doctrine of Broken Chains. "For 40,000 years," he said, "the Concorde has ruled through fear. They enslave the weak because they believe strength is the only law that matters. They torture and kill because they have never faced consequences." He paused and looked at each council member in turn. "From this moment forward, humanity will teach the galaxy a new law." He activated the holographic display, and words appeared in the air above him. "For every human enslaved, a world burns. For every human killed, a species answers. We did not start this war, but we will be the last ones standing when it ends." The Council voted unanimously to adopt the doctrine. There would be no negotiation with the Concorde. There would be no peace treaties or diplomatic solutions. There would only be war until humanity was free or humanity was dead. The Defiance arrived at the Valkyrie homeworld without warning. Their defense grid was designed to detect ships traveling at normal slick space speeds, giving them hours of warning before any attack. The Defiance traveled so fast that the grid did not register its approach until the ship was already in orbit. Commander Tanaka looked down at the planet, where the Velkari High Council ruled their empire of slaves. She thought about her daughter, taken 5 years ago, probably dead by now. She thought about the billions of humans who had suffered and died during the occupation. She thought about the message she was about to send to the entire galaxy. "Open a channel to the planet's surface," she ordered. "All frequencies." "Channel open, Commander." Yuki leaned forward and spoke the words that would echo through history. "This is Commander Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Compact warship Defiance. Your invasion of Earth has failed. Your harvest of our people is over. You have 9 days to surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate what happens to species that try to enslave humanity." She paused, letting the silence stretch. Choose wisely. The Velkari High Council did not believe her. They had thousands of ships defending their homeworld. They had orbital platforms bristling with weapons. They had the combined military might of an empire that had never been defeated. Surely one primitive ship could not threaten them. They chose to fight. It was the worst decision they had ever made. Over the next 9 days, the Defiance was joined by every human vessel that could make the journey. 112 ships arrived, facing a Velkari defense fleet of over 2,000. The battle began on the morning of the 10th day, and it was nothing like the Velkari expected. Human ships did not fight like civilized vessels. They rammed enemy ships when their weapons failed. They detonated their own reactors to take enemies with them. They launched boarding parties that fought hand-to-hand in corridors, killing with knives and bare hands. When their guns ran dry, the Velkari had never seen anything like it. They had never faced an enemy that simply refused to stop. When the battle ended, humanity had lost 63 ships. The Velkari had lost everything. Their defense fleet was destroyed. Their orbital platforms were debris, and Commander Tanaka's voice echoed across their world once more. "Your 9 days are over. Surrender now, or watch your cities burn." The Velkari High Council surrendered in 3 hours. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the first species humanity had encountered became the first species humanity had conquered. And deep in the halls of the Galactic Concord, the elder races began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had tried to harvest Earth. Now Earth was coming for them. The Galactic Concord had not held an emergency session in 8,000 years. The last time had been when the Void Plague swept through the outer colonies and killed 3 billion sentient beings. This crisis was worse. Ambassador Thalnix stood before the assembled representatives of 12 elder species and delivered the news that none of them wanted to hear. "The Velkari Dominion has fallen," he said. "Their homeworld is under human occupation. Their fleet is destroyed. Their empire is collapsing." Silence filled the great chamber as the words sank in. The Velkari had been one of the most powerful members of the Concord. They had enslaved 200 worlds. They had possessed 3,000 warships, and they had been defeated by a species that had not even achieved spaceflight 10 years ago. "This is unacceptable," High Sovereign Morthax of the Gorath hegemony growled. "These humans are nothing but livestock. We should have exterminated them the moment they showed resistance." "Extermination was discussed," the Nalthrix Queen Mind replied. "The Council decided that the resources lost would outweigh the benefits." "Then the Council was wrong," Morthax said, "and now we pay the price for that weakness." Ambassador Thalnix raised a crystalline hand to restore order. "Arguments about the past will not help us now," he said. "We must focus on the present threat. The humans are no longer contained to their homeworld. They have faster-than-light capability that exceeds our own. They are expanding. Then we crush them before they spread further. Morthax declared. I propose a coalition fleet, every warship from every species in the Concord, united against this common enemy. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in Concord history, all 12 elder species would combine their military forces into a single armada. 90,000 warships from across the Orion Arm began gathering at the designated rally point. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. It would be enough to conquer any enemy. It would be enough to burn any world. It would be enough to exterminate any species that dared to challenge the natural order. The Concord fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a day the humans would never forget. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Unconquered, and watched the enemy ships drop out of hyperspace. She counted them carefully, showing no emotion as the numbers climbed higher and higher. 1,000 ships, 10,000 ships, 50,000 ships, 90,000 ships. Her tactical officer, a young man named David Park, looked at the display and felt his hands begin to shake. Admiral, he said, we have 340 vessels. They outnumber us 265 to 1. I can count, Lieutenant, Chen replied calmly. Our projections suggest we can destroy perhaps 8,000 of their ships before we are overwhelmed, Park continued. That is less than 10% of their force. Then we will have to do better than the projections suggest. The communications officer looked up from her station. Admiral, the enemy fleet is hailing us. They wish to negotiate terms of surrender. Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. Open a channel, she ordered. Let them speak. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the face of Grand Admiral Vorthax, Supreme Commander of the Concord Coalition Fleet. He was a Gorath, massive and armored, with tusks that curved up past his eyes, and a voice like grinding stones. Human Commander, he rumbled, I am Grand Admiral Vorthax. I offer you one chance to save your species. Surrender now, accept your place as servants of the Concord, and we will spare your homeworld. Admiral Chen stared at him for a long moment. Grand Admiral, she said, do you know what your Concord did to my world? We attempted to harvest your species for labor, Vorthax replied. It was nothing personal. It was simply the natural order. The natural order, Chen repeated. You came to our home, you killed our families, you put collars on our children. You tried to turn us into slaves, as is proper for lesser species. Chen nodded slowly. I want you to remember that you said that, she said. I want you to remember that when this battle is over and your fleet is burning. I want you to remember that you came to our home and tried to take everything from us. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something cold and hard. You came to harvest us. You came to collar our children. You came to our home. A pause. Welcome to the Sol system, Grand Admiral. None of you are leaving. She cut the channel before he could respond. All ships, she broadcast to the Terran Second Fleet. This is Admiral Chen. The enemy believes they have come to finish what they started. They believe their numbers make them invincible. They believe we will break. She stood straighter. Show them how wrong they are. All ships attack. 340 human vessels surged forward to meet 90,000 enemy ships. The Battle of the Oort Cloud had begun. Grand Admiral Vorthax watched the tiny human fleet approach and felt contempt fill his heart. These creatures were insane. They were throwing themselves against an overwhelming force with no hope of victory. It would be a slaughter. He was right about the slaughter. He was wrong about who would be slaughtered. The human ships did not fight like any enemy the Concord had ever faced. They used tactics that defied all military doctrine. They hid among the asteroids of the outer system, using the rocks as shields and weapons. They detonated nuclear mines that had been placed years ago, turning empty space into killing fields. They launched missiles that seemed to come from everywhere at once, overwhelming point defense systems with sheer numbers. Failed. They did something the Concord had never seen. They kept fighting anyway. A human destroyer with its weapons destroyed rammed directly into a Gorath battleship, punching through the hull and detonating its reactor inside the enemy vessel. A human frigate, engines crippled, used its remaining power to accelerate into the heart of a Nalthrix carrier group, taking 4 ships with it when it exploded. Human marines boarded enemy vessels through breaches in the hull, fighting hand-to-hand in corridors that were never designed for close combat. They fought with guns until the guns were empty. They fought with knives until the knives broke. They fought with bare hands and teeth and pure stubborn rage. Grand Admiral Vorthax watched his fleet die and could not understand what he was seeing. "They are insane," he whispered. "They are completely insane." "No," his tactical officer replied. "They are not insane. They are angry, and they do not know how to stop." The battle lasted 11 hours. 11 hours of constant combat, constant death, constant horror. Human ships fell by the dozens, then by the scores. But for every human ship destroyed, hundreds of Concord vessels died with it. The humans called it spite-based combat doctrine. As they were going to die, they were going to take as many enemies with them as possible. If they were going to burn, the enemy would burn with them. If they could not win, they could at least make victory cost more than the enemy could afford. When the battle finally ended, Grand Admiral Vorthax looked at the remains of his fleet and felt something he had never experienced before. He felt fear. Of 90,000 warships, only 847 remained operational. 89,000 vessels had been destroyed by a fleet of 340. Admiral Chen Weilin surveyed her own. Losses: 212 ships gone, thousands of human lives lost. She had won the greatest victory in human history, and all she felt was grief for those who had not survived to see it. She filed her report to the Terran Council and requested relief of command. "I failed," she wrote. "I should have saved more of them." The Council refused her resignation and promoted her to Fleet Admiral. But Chen never forgave herself for the ships she had lost. The galaxy learned a new word that day: Terran. It became a word that made admirals hesitate and generals reconsider. It became a word that parents used to frighten disobedient children. It became a word that meant something simple and terrifying. Do not provoke the humans, because the humans do not know how to surrender, and they will drag you down with them if you give them no other choice. The Galactic Concord sent no more fleets to Sol. They had learned their lesson. The humans were not livestock. The humans were not prey. The humans were something far worse. They were survivors. And survivors do whatever it takes to stay alive. The Terran Compact did not stop at defense. The Council met in the deep bunkers beneath what had once been Geneva, and they studied 40,000 years of galactic history. They found a pattern that made their decisions simple. Every species that had shown mercy to the Concord had been destroyed. Every species that had offered peace had been enslaved. Every species that had trusted the elder races had been betrayed. The Concord did not understand kindness. They understood only one thing: power. Fleet Admiral Alexander Volkov was a man who had watched his entire family die during the invasion. His wife had been killed in the first bombardment of Moscow. His children had been taken by Velkari slavers and never seen again. His parents had starved in the refugee camps that followed the collapse of civilization. He had nothing left except his duty and his rage. Expeditionary Armada and a single directive: make them understand. Volkov understood exactly what they meant. The campaign began with the Velkari, because the Velkari had started everything. Their homeworld was already occupied, their military destroyed, their empire crumbling. But Volkov had not forgotten what they had done. He had not forgotten the 2.3 billion humans who had died during the invasion. He had not forgotten the millions who had been taken as slaves. He had not forgotten anything. The Velkhari expected execution. They expected their cities to be bombed and their population exterminated. They had done the same to countless other species, and they assumed humans would do the same to them. Volkov did something worse. He relocated the Velkhari population to barren moons at the edge of their system. He put them to work building monuments. Monuments to every human who had died during the invasion. Invasion. Every single name, carved into stone by Velkhari hands. You wanted slaves, Volkov broadcast to the galaxy. Now you understand what that means. The work would take generations. The Velkhari would spend the next 1,000 years paying for what they had done. And every species in the galaxy watched and understood the message. Humans did not forget. Humans did not forgive. And humans found ways to make their enemies suffer that were far worse than death. The Nalthrix Collective was next. They had tortured human prisoners for psychological warfare. They had broadcast screams and suffering across every human frequency. They had tried to break humanity's will through cruelty and horror. The Nalthrix were a hive mind, millions of bodies sharing a single consciousness through their queen minds. Without the queens, individual Nalthrix could not function. They became confused, frightened, alone, experienced something they had never known before. Individual consciousness. Human special forces located every Nalthrix queen mind in the collective. There were 17 of them, hidden in protected bunkers across their territory. One by one, the humans captured them. They did not kill the queens. That would have been mercy. Instead, they placed each queen in complete isolation, cut off from the hive mind, unable to connect with any other consciousness. For a being that had never experienced loneliness, it was worse than any torture. The queens went mad within months. And without their queens, the Nalthrix Collective collapsed into chaos. Billions of individual Nalthrix suddenly found themselves alone in their own heads for the first time in their existence. Many could not survive the experience. The Nalthrix had tried to break humanity through psychological warfare. Humanity had returned the favor. Orathi banking clans had not participated directly in the invasion. They had simply financed it. They had provided the loans that funded the Velkhari fleet. They had ensured the slave ships that transported human captives. They had profited from every death and every collar and every moment of human suffering. The Orathi believed they were safe because they had never fired a weapon at Earth. They believed that economic power made them untouchable. They believed that no one would risk the galactic financial collapse that would follow their destruction. They were wrong. Human intelligence agents had spent 3 years infiltrating Orathi financial networks. They had planted dormant programs in every major banking system. They had mapped every transaction, every account, every hidden reserve. On a single day, at a single moment, they activated everything. The Orathi financial system did not crash. It simply ceased to exist. Trillions of credits vanished. Debts were erased, and so were assets. Contracts became meaningless when no one could prove what they said. The Orathi, who had ruled through wealth for 10,000 years, woke up one morning to find themselves bankrupt. They had funded the enslavement of humanity. Now they had nothing. Volkov moved through the Concord like a force of nature, and every species that had participated in the invasion faced judgment. The Gorath hegemony, whose soldiers had burned human cities, found their military leadership systematically assassinated by human operatives they never saw coming. The crystalline hegemony, who had provided the neural compliance collar technology, watched as human scientists released a resonance virus that shattered their silicon-based bodies from the inside out. It was not genocide. Humanity killed only those directly responsible for crimes against Earth. to cripple entire civilizations. And it sent a message that echoed through every corner of the galaxy. The humans were not satisfied with victory. The humans wanted justice. And human justice was terrible to behold. But Volkov also offered something else. He offered a choice. Species that had remained neutral during Earth's invasion were approached with a simple offer. Join the new Terran Accord as equal partners, with full rights and full protections, or be remembered as enemies who simply had not acted yet. Most species chose to join. They had seen what happened to those who opposed humanity. They had seen the Velhari building monuments for eternity. They had seen the Nalthrix queens screaming alone in their isolation chambers. They had seen the Orathi begging in the streets of their own worlds. And they decided that partnership with humans was far better than the alternative. With each passing month, former slave species, liberated from Concord control, joined eagerly. They had suffered under the elder races for thousands of years. They welcomed humanity as liberators, as saviors, as the answer to prayers they had given up hope of ever having answered. A young diplomat named Priya Sharma was assigned to oversee the integration of new member species. She traveled to dozens of worlds, meeting with leaders who had once been slaves themselves. "Why do you trust us?" she asked one of them, an elderly creature from a species that had been enslaved for 3,000 years. "We are conquerors, just like the Concord was." The old being looked at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "You are not like the Concord," he said. "The Concord conquered for profit and pleasure. They enjoyed our pain. You conquered out of necessity and rage. You do not enjoy what you do. And more importantly, you offer us something the Concord never did." "What is that?" Sharma asked. "A seat at the table," the old being replied. "The Concord ruled us. You invite us to rule alongside you. That is the difference that matters." Sharma thought about his words for a long time afterward. She thought about what humanity had become in the years since the invasion. They had been victims, then survivors, then warriors, then conquerors. But what would they become next? Would they be tyrants like the Concord, or would they be something better? She did not know the answer, but she hoped with all her heart that humanity would choose wisely, because the galaxy was watching, and the galaxy would remember. 50 years had passed since first contact. 50 years since the Valkyrie fleet had darkened Earth's skies. 50 years since humanity had learned they were not alone in the universe. Everything had changed. The Galactic Concord was gone, dissolved into history like so many empires before it. In its place stood the Terran Accord, a federation of over 200 species united under a single charter. Humanity held permanent veto power on the Accord Council, a privilege granted by the species who had chosen to join willingly. They had expected humans to abuse that power. They expected tyranny dressed in different colors. They found something else entirely. Chancellor Priya Sharma walked through the corridors of Accord Station, the massive space station that served as the heart of galactic government. She was old now, her hair silver, and her face lined with the weight of decades. But her eyes were still sharp. Mind was still clear. She had devoted her life to building something better than the Concord. Some days she believed she had succeeded. Other days she was not so certain. Ambassador Thalnix fell into step beside her, his crystalline body catching the light as he moved. He was ancient now, one of the last survivors of the old Concord leadership. Most of his colleagues had died during the Terran campaigns or in the chaos that followed. Thalnix had survived because he had been one of the first to recognize what humanity truly was. "Chancellor," he said, "the Council is waiting." "Let them wait a moment longer," Sharma replied. "I want to enjoy the view." They stopped at a massive observation window that looked out over the station's construction yards. Ships of every design were being built there, crewed by beings from 100 different worlds. Humans worked alongside former enemies, building vessels that would carry them, all into a shared future. It is beautiful, Thalnix admitted. I never thought I would see something like this. Neither did I, Sharma said. When I was young, during the occupation, I dreamed only of revenge. I wanted to see the Concord burn. I wanted to see every elder species suffer as we had suffered. She paused. I never imagined we would build something instead. Your people are strange, Thalnix said. In my experience, conquerors do not build. They simply take what others have built and claim it as their own. We tried that approach, Sharma replied. It did not satisfy us. Revenge felt empty once we achieved it. So we decided to try something different. They watched the ships being built in silence. May I ask you something, Chancellor? Thalnix said eventually. You may always ask, Sharma replied. I may not always answer. Why did your people choose mercy after victory? You could have exterminated us. You could have enslaved us as we enslaved you. The galaxy would not have blamed you. Sharma smiled, and Thalnix noticed that even after 50 years, human smiles still made him uneasy. There was something predatory about them, something that reminded him that humans had spent their entire evolution killing things with their bare hands. We did not choose mercy, she said. We chose efficiency. I do not understand. Dead enemies cannot work, Sharma explained. Destroyed worlds cannot produce. Extinct species cannot learn. We needed the galaxy functional, not ruined. Tyranny is expensive, Ambassador. It requires constant force to maintain. Cooperation is cheaper. She turned to face him directly. We are not kind, Ambassador. We are patient. And we remember everything. Thalnix felt ice form in his veins, the same ice he had felt 50 years ago when he first realized what humanity truly was. You are saying that your mercy is calculated, he said, that you spare us because it serves your interests. I am saying that our mercy and our interests happen to align, Sharma replied. For now, as long as that remains true, the galaxy will prosper, and everyone will be treated fairly. She let the implication hang in the air. And if our interests ever change, Ambassador, you should hope you are no longer alive to see it. The council session that followed was routine, dealing with trade agreements and border disputes, and the thousand small matters that kept a galactic government running. Sharma handled it with the skill of decades of practice, but her mind kept drifting back to her conversation with Thalnix. She wondered if she had been too honest. She wondered if honesty mattered anymore. After the session ended, she retreated to her private office and pulled up a file she had not looked at in years. It was a recording from the early days of the occupation, before the resistance had truly organized. The recording showed a young woman, barely 20 years old, being dragged away by Velkari soldiers. The woman was screaming, reaching for someone off-screen. Ended abruptly as the Velkari disabled the camera. That young woman had been Sharma's sister. She had never been found. Sharma closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. The galaxy believed that humanity had moved past the invasion. They believed that 50 years had healed the wounds. They believed that the new generation, born after the war ended, did not carry the same hatred as their parents. They were wrong. Every human alive knew someone who had been lost during the invasion. Every human alive had grown up hearing stories of the occupation. Every human alive carried a piece of that trauma in their hearts. They did not speak of it often, because speaking of it served no purpose. But they did not forget. They would never forget. Across the galaxy, monuments stood on 100 worlds. Some had been built by Velkari hands as penance for their crimes. Others had been built by humans, themselves, memorials to those who had not survived. On Earth, in the ruins of New York City, the largest monument of all rose toward the sky. It was a simple structure, a black obelisk that contained the names of every human who had died during the invasion and the war that followed. 2.7 billion names etched into stone that would last for millennia. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it. They came to pay their respects. They came to understand. They came to remember what happened when the galaxy tried to enslave Earth. And deep in the minds of every alien who stood before that monument, the same thought echoed. Never again. Never again would they try to subjugate humanity. Never again would they underestimate the creatures from the small blue world. Never again would they wake the sleeping predator. Because the Concord had tried to harvest Earth, because they saw humans as animals. Now, 50 years later, every species in the galaxy understood the truth. Humans were not animals. They were not livestock. They were not prey. They were apex predators who had simply been sleeping. And the galaxy would spend the next 10,000 years hoping they never woke up angry again. Chancellor Sharma stood at her window, looking out at the stars that had once been enemies. They were allies now, or at least they pretended to be. She knew that fear was the foundation of that alliance. She knew that the other species served alongside humanity because they were terrified of what would happen if they did not. And she knew that fear was not the same as respect. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of extinction, and had pushed back so hard that the entire galaxy had trembled. They had proven that they would not be enslaved, would not be broken, would not be forgotten, and now they had a coming back choice. They could rule through fear forever, maintaining their position through the memory of what they had done. Or they could build something better, something that future generations could be proud of. Sharma hoped they would choose wisely. She hoped that the hatred would fade with time, and that the fear would transform into genuine partnership. She hoped that her grandchildren would live in a galaxy where humanity was respected, not feared. But if the galaxy ever forgot, if any species ever thought that humans had gone soft, if anyone ever tried to enslave Earth again, then humanity would remind them why the word Terran made admirals hesitate and emperors lose sleep. Because humans did not start fights, but they always finished them. And the galaxy would never be allowed to forget that lesson. Not now, not ever. Not while a single human heart still beat among the stars. Beginning, P. And the beginning was only the start of humanity's true story. The story of a species that had been pushed down and had risen to touch the heavens. The story of prey that had become predator. The story of slaves who had become rulers. The story of Earth and the galaxy that would never dare to threaten it again.